Hi everyone, it's been a while. Well, for me it's been a while. I'm here with Hastings enjoying the sun, having a nice coffee. I'm sorry I still have to do a lot of work and a lot of research, but I've had to put it on pause due to my own projects that I've got, that I've had to devote my attention and passion into. So I apologize for that. But I can't keep away from this Canada. What's happening in Canada with the visit of Charles and Camilla, because it's an absolute mountain of shit. And I'm going to go through it with you. I think for Americans especially, maybe not even Americans, but even Canadians and Australians, knowing the difference between a colony and a dominion, knowing the difference between how we're governed within the Commonwealth, knowing how we're governed in the Commonwealth, a republic versus a dominion versus a colony, or an arm of, well, we're all basically America. New Zealand, Canada and Australia are all arms of the British Empire, but we're all governed very differently, and so it's an interesting kind of aspect to talk about. So let's start off. I want to talk about Canada because I think it's important for Australians because of the Commonwealth. Australians feel very close to Canadians and to Canada. We feel that we are probably the most culturally similar, other than probably New Zealand. But New Zealand has its own culture. Probably we're just more assimilate. I guess we settle within one another's countries. Well, New Zealand is more in Australia, so we're used to that. But Canadians, we feel if we were to ever move overseas, usually the first suggestion is always Canada, even though we probably don't move there as much, mostly because of the weather. It's because of Canada and Canadians, Canadians being culturally very, very similar to us, probably a little more polite and accommodating than we are. But we seem to get each other a lot more than Americans do. Americans can't really, a lot of the time they don't understand. And I'm not saying all Americans. This is a generalization. Most Americans don't get our directness and how Aussies operate. But Canadians are very, very similar. And I think that's because of our British history and the colonization of our countries. Very, very similar times, very similar constitutionally, how we were designed, how democratic we both became. It was very, very, very similar in the way that we are both very, very modern. Our approach is very, very modern, therefore very, very accepting, very, very open to new ideas or to accommodating global agendas and imperialism, and calling it diversity, calling it acceptance, calling it wokeness, calling it whatever you can, as a political acceptance or a social acceptance. That's really what has happened between Canada and Australia. Australia, though, still has they're trying to drown out our culture, our Australian culture and our Australian directness, towards more of a Canadian vibe of multiculturalism and just national sovereignty. So they're trying to stamp out, how honest and confrontational I guess we can be and direct. And that's definitely intentional. So there's no fight back. So when I see things about Canada, I feel quite emotional because it feels like a sister country nation to Australia. It feels like whatever happens to Canada will happen to Australia, which usually is the case when it comes to COVID, when it comes to almost everything. One of us is always the prime example used to lead an imperial agenda of Britain. And it's been done. I feel really bad for Canada because it's been done just so blatantly and brazenly with Trudeau. And they are much more accommodating. So I think they've been used a great deal. But then we were used with COVID far, far more, I suspect, because we were not used to such order, such tyranny. And we are also a lot more, we feel very responsible for our community. And I think fear-mongering, we were just not used to it. We were not used to that sort of like tyrannical rule. And we just didn't know what to make of it. We were processing it while it was happening. We couldn't understand it. And I just find it so funny that no one points out that, COVID was the worst. I mean, in Italy as well, but usually the worst across the Five Eyes, and was really put through the Five Eyes very, very strongly. And no one really makes that connection or correlation between Britain and the monarchy and COVID and how it was implemented. I find that really, really odd. But anyway, I'm just going off. So let's get into what's been happening in Canada with Charlie's visit. Now, initially you get this idiot, Rebecca English from Daily Mail, saying saying that Charles and Camilla were absolutely bombarded in Canada, in Ottawa. Sorry. They were bombarded because they're because they're pop stars, and as I said to my followers, a geriatric Harry Styles with pendulous testicles. They are the it and a bit. They are everything to us, and they're so relevant, and they just impose themselves in everything, and the quality of our lives, and up to our very birth and our very death, and we're grateful for it, obviously. So this is the first post I see about the visit to Canada. I think it was Anti-Venom Adams, who's a great follower of mine on YouTube. They were talking about the Canada visit. I didn't even know there was a Canada visit until they said that, and then I looked in, I saw the post coming up, and I was just like, oh, okay. There it goes. So it's been very interesting how Charlie's been making the rounds all across the world, in Italy, in Australia, starting last year, Canada, William with America and France. And then you've got the two village idiots making the rounds overseas in Colombia and so forth, and the Commonwealth nations and whatever have you. So you've got this little posse making the rounds all across the world. I know that they're trying to be relevant. I know that, but Charles is going into the parliament or the governments and having a seat there, and they're singing and praising and saluting God Save the King. I mean, it can't be more obvious, but there's something going on, And it's been very interesting as to what exactly has been going on. What exactly is going on behind closed doors with Charles? Maybe they're swearing allegiance to the changes that are taking place, or he's trying to secure something or other. I don't think it's necessarily a PR stunt, because, to be honest, I don't think it should be even. I mean, probably it is, because if it wasn't, if it was purely strategic, it wouldn't be televised or published through PR. Let's face it, this is the king. He can travel wherever he wants, and it can not be published. There are hidden escapades, there are hidden events that we don't know about, that we will never know about. So yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting why. Maybe he's trying to, through his soft power, meaning cowardice, he's trying to passively show everyone that he is the ruler of the world. Who knows there? But it's definitely he's catching up with all his peeps, the people that he employs to be prime ministers and presidents, to say a few words. So it's been interesting to see that pattern occurring. We're talking about Aga Khan here and his Medici bloodline. That Mark Carney was the governor of City of London. He really created the green imperialism, the global economy that we're going to face, blended finance, the takeover of all of our natural assets. He helped create that structure while he was governor up until 2020, and he was the one who implemented and launched the world's inflation by March 2020. Then he left. But, Bank of England, City of London, the world's banking, central banking policy, the bank that governs all banks, and obviously it is an imperial bank and is the imperial centre, City of London, for the British Empire, or the Holy Roman Empire turned British Empire. So, it's not like it just doesn't feel any different to him visiting City of London by cab. I mean, he would never go by cab, Charlie, but this doesn't mean anything particularly. Oh yeah, this was this morning when Cameron Walker, another pleb, said quotes. And I think he was actually, this is the funny thing, they're so oblivious and so detached from reality that their agenda always gets in the way. And their agenda is always just very forthcoming and very transparent and ironic. And they don't see that. They don't see what exactly they're putting out, because they're thinking it aligns with some PR facade, like, Trump versus the world, or Trump versus Canada, Trump versus Carney, which is hilarious because Trump also implemented Carney's central banking policy in March 2020, and then he left and put it all on Biden because, as I've said before, inflation has to, it grows, it becomes inflation over 18 months. It's not straight away, because obviously it needs to take effect into the economy, and things need to happen for it to reach inflation or hyperinflation. So Carney and Trump are mates. Canada and US are mates. They've been mates since the very beginning, the very origins of their colonization. There used to be, Canada used to really govern America, from what I've read, because they were closer aligned with Britain. They were, in fact, just a second identity of the British Empire. And so they would have an office, I think, in Washington, And sometimes the PM there would fill in for the president over there. So it's very interesting. I don't know if that's still happening now, but that's what I've read. So that this whole relationship really, Canada and America and US have always been known as a North American continent under the British Empire. If you look into history, maybe that's what Charles is referring to regarding the continent. He could be talking about the North American continent that they colonized and ruled when initially being Canada and the Americas. So, while the American states at that point, because there was still was it the French and the Spanish? I can't remember exactly. Anyway, so you've got here quotes that Cameron has put forward, thinking that it's like a bombshell in favor of the King Charles and the British Empire, when in fact it's the complete opposite, because it just speaks of complete hypocrisy and stupidity. So you've got many Canadians are feeling anxious and worried about the drastically changing world around them. Full stop. No closure. No, that's not happening. Not on my watch. I will see to it that my Dominion, my Canadian Dominion that I govern, or that my Privy Council governs, will be secure and safe from harm. None of that. He's still meant to be acting ceremonially, but the whole irony of him being in Canada announcing this says something entirely different. It says that that it's his empire and that he's ruling Canada as a dominion even still, and that the free will democratic constitution of Canada is just a nice piece of writing. So that's what makes me laugh, because it's just so fucking stupid. And I just put my hand on my forehead and just shook my head and closed my eyes. I just couldn't believe it at the time. But let's continue. So he doesn't give any solace, any comfort. He's stating feeling anxious and worried about the drastically changing world around them. So the drastically changing world around them is a statement. So it's happening. So it's fact. And then he's talking about how Canadians are reacting negatively towards it. And then he's pretty much, in a way, suggesting you shut the fuck up about it. Canadians shut up about it and accept it, but take the power back and adapt and survive and be the hero of your demise or future, which is what he's created and designed for you. But you're not meant to make those two connections, okay? So it's meant to be Canadians are purely reacting to Trump and America, like America and Trump have any control over the world. So Canadians can give themselves far more than any foreign power or any continent can ever take away. Now that is the most ironic and stupid statement I've seen, because King Charles is the foreign power that rules under a different continent that rules Canada. So he is in fact unknowingly, or maybe knowingly and mockingly, talking about himself. He has harmed Canadians with COVID. He has harmed Canadians with inflation. He has harmed Canadians with Trudeau, with Carney. He has harmed Canadians with the concept of transferring their water resources over to America and Mexico, hence the North American Union and trade agreement. That's under his Bilderberg Committee that his dad was a part of, and that intelligence asset who became a prince of Netherlands created, and was a part of creating almost all of those committees around that time, including, World Economic Forum with Philip. It's phenomenal that he said Canadians give themselves far more power than any foreign power or that on any continent can ever take away. I've looked at the comments under this post and people are like, that makes no sense. I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. You're not meant to understand it because he's talking about his own strategies that have been implemented for Global Agenda 2030. And he's the one who's talking about everything that's been happening to Canada and the agreements that have been happening with Canada for their future. So you're not meant to understand exactly like, oh, stop. A door moved, so we have to deal with that at this point. Apologies. Yeah. Come on. Mate, stop. Anyway. All right. So we've got this situation happening that's ambiguous and vague with this statement. But if you are aware of what's been taking place, that there is a foreign takeover of Canada and always has been, that's the point of how Canada's been falling to pieces since COVID, how it's been crumbling beneath Canadians' very feet, as well as Australia and America and New Zealand and many other countries. How that's happening is because of this foreign power, and he's talking about it as though it's an enemy, as though it's separate from him, when it's him and his puppets and his allies. So it's just pretty funny. And there you go with Cameron trying to suggest something very smart, very intelligent. So smart. Oh, it's breathtaking. Now, quickly, this is this asshole's CV. Now, Governor of Bank of England, as I said, finance advisor to the British Prime Minister, believe it or not. He was also finance advisor to Trudeau, or economic advisor to Trudeau. But you see here just a long list of, like, obviously he started out in Harvard, then in Oxford, Goldman Sachs straight away. I mean, you can see his whole existence is imperial. Every part of this CV is an imperial structure and pathway. Blavatnik School at Oxford, member of the Foundation Board of the World Economic Forum, Bloomberg, Peterson Institute for International Economics. Come on, mate. Senior Counselor to Macro Advisory Partners, Watershed, President of Chatham House. So he's running really the international government and foreign policy, as well as central banking policy for the world. This guy is very, very powerful. He's much more powerful than his silly little job as a Prime Minister of Canada. He was simultaneously being an advisor to Trudeau and Johnson, to both the British and Canadian parliaments, and we'll get into that in a second. That in itself is a huge national security concern. But was it a concern? No, it wasn't. And this was while he was still governor of Bank of England. He became an advisor to Johnson, and then straight after, around June 2020, after he implemented the central banking policy, did he become an advisor to Trudeau, funnily, about economics, which is hilarious because Trudeau just accepted his central banking policy to kill his own nation with inflation, and then he came in to manage it, which was then, by 2022, the inevitable demise of Trudeau. This whole Carney's inflation was the demise of Trudeau, and you blame Trudeau, but it was Carney who actually created the central banking policy. He was the one who put that forward because he was governor of the Bank of England in City of London. It's just hilarious how that works. So Consultative chaired the Global Economy Meeting and Economic Consultative Committee of the Bank for International Settlements, BIS, in Switzerland. I mean, for fuck's sake, this is like all imperial. It's just all global imperialism, and he's in charge of all of the empires, banking and economics, to push the Global Agenda 2030 forward, the imperial restructure and socialism. It's insane. Co-chair for the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero, UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance. It's all a big bloody joke. What a saviour. Because, he's conservative and quiet, so you should be loyal to him because he doesn't say much. He's not like Trudeau, where he just shoots himself in the foot. No. Carney's a doer. That's Charlie right there, shooting himself in the foot with his Freudian slip. Now, this is where I was talking about just before Carney launches inflation across the world with Bank of England central banking policy in March 2020. In January the 16th, to be precise, 2020, he's appointed advisor to he's advisor to the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson for COP 226. And then by June-ish, 2020, by the summer of 2020, he becomes economic advisor to Trudeau. But they keep he's got that dual role, that dual job of being advisors to two different governments up until November 2021, when he ceases being advisor to Johnson under COP 2026. No national security concerns whatsoever. You see there. And then you see here. In the summer of 2020, Bloomberg reported Carney was informally advising Trudeau, Bloomberg being also a part of Carney's CV. I mean, who can you trust? The world is completely controlled. He was informally advising Trudeau on how to pull Canada out of the economic shocks of the COVID pandemic while just implementing inflation, which everyone says is a result of COVID. Well, which then happens straight after. So everyone's focused on COVID. Everyone's focused on the economic plunder of COVID, thinking that's the worst that could possibly happen, while Carney is implementing inflation with Bank of England. Nice. quite funny. Trudeau allows Carney's inflation to be implemented in Canada, which will peak in 18 months after. And a month or so after it's implemented, he gets Carney as economic advisor, knowing the devastation that will hit Canada, which turned Canadians against Trudeau. Now we get to the good bit. This is the best bit of all. May the 27th, my time, 10:14 a.m. This afternoon, the Queen was sworn in as a member of the Canadian Privy Council. In the presence of the King, the Governor-General, and the Prime Minister, the Queen participated in a private ceremony. While you publish it. The Privy Council is a group of people who advise the King on issues of importance to Canada. Now, if you remember a while back when I was contemplating the whole, if Rome was still ruling Britain, if Rome was still the empire and a continuation of this empire through, that no one has said through the British Empire. That wasn't really the theory that has been spewed out. The theory by everyone else is, King Charles is but a figurehead of this empire. He has little power. There's intelligence. There's the Privy Council that has greater power than, that has far greater power in the order or the ladder up to Rome than Britain itself, or the British Empire and the monarchy itself, and King Charles. They say and stipulate that the Privy Council really controls and governs the monarch and the monarchy into the Roman Empire. And I have thought about that. And a while back when I looked into the wedding, or not the wedding, sorry, the coronation of King Charles, when Mordaunt or whatever the hell her name was, Penny Mordaunt, the head of Privy Council, was the one kind of leading the whole ceremony. She had the laurel wreath embroidered around her cape or whatever the hell it was. It was very symbolic of some sort of Roman ceremony, allowing or passing power to go to Charles. And I thought, holy shit, this looks like they're giving the power. And I had this kind of like epiphany. Oh my God, I think this is how it is, what people are saying about this theory of Rome and stuff like that, and the Roman Empire. But this sort of situation where it's not even a queen, it's the Queen Consort is appointed as a member of the Privy Council. After I've looked into the Holy Roman Empire and when it kind of dissolved, it really didn't leave, it didn't vanish, it was still in charge, but it also then decentralized into, and I don't think it decentralized centrally into and solely into the British Empire. I think that was still an element, but at this point I think it's just really the British Empire that's ruling at this point. And I haven't looked into those changes and evolutions just yet, but this is how I'm seeing it. When I've looked into that, and then you have this, it speaks to me as though this is purely the British Empire and Charles. But it doesn't just prove that. It proves that Charles is in fact in charge or in power over the Privy Council. So it goes against everything I had initially thought of and believed, or maybe believed, and was kind of, going down that theory and confirming that theory. Now, I've had issue with that theory with Rome being the empire because no one could explain to me the reign of Charlemagne. They couldn't explain why the Lombardi family were this merchant family were in charge of Italy, and then the Pope didn't have power and had to flee to Charlemagne to be rescued and saved. And then Charlemagne kind of created the concept of or the proposal of, hey, I'm going to give you the army you need to defeat the Lombardi rule of Italy, and we're going to create a second Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, and it's going to be a dual system with the Pope's blessing and me as emperor. And really, in essence, the emperor Charlemagne was the one in power. He just needed the Pope's blessing to give it divine rule, to give it divine acceptance, especially in times like those in the year 800 when the initial Pope, when Rome had fallen, the initial Pope created this strategy of implementing Catholicism and the Church all across Europe, and created this concept. So it became a situation, a cultural situation, where the British, where many Europeans would regularly go do pilgrimage to Rome, where the kings of wasn't England at the time, but the kings of Britain would go do pilgrimage. I don't know about the Saxon kings, but I think they did, because anyway, they would do pilgrimage and so forth. So the church had a great deal of power and worth to the people, so it gave this kind of authorship of this divine authorship and spiritual authorship of the empire at the time. That wasn't really ever explained to me. I've actually messaged some of these theorists, and I've said, so can you give me an explanation as to how this took place, or why this took place then? Because it's obviously, the Pope running for help to Charlemagne is not exactly what you would consider the Roman Empire. It's not exactly what that story is too genuine to be false. It's just, it doesn't make particular sense. And no one could explain that theory. So then I really questioned all these people who do all this research. I really started to question exactly what has taken place, and if this whole Roman Empire thing is a complete and utter cover-up. Because what it does is it reaches the black nobility, it reaches families that are untouchable, unseeable, rather than something that you can see in front of your very eyes, rather something that is rather simple, rather that you can confront and argue. And it just didn't make sense as well as to how every imperial move and strategy, including all the world wars, including all the Central American juntas and stuff, and all of just every move there has been under British intelligence or British American assets, and there's always been a British backer to these American assets, and British intelligence coming from German intelligence originally, as does most, because of the Holy Roman Empire passing through England. When that's happened, all of the other intelligence agencies have actually been modelled and trained by British intelligence. So it's really just like every intelligence arm, even every terrorist arm, are have been created through British intelligence. And that's how this whole Five Eyes intelligence network has been created. No one can explain from a Roman perspective or a Roman Empire theory perspective how that the crown has and holds like all of this power. How the whole empire has been shifted under the control of the crown, in terms of the sword. I wouldn't say the spirit, now that I'm researching, Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. I would say that kept under the Holy Roman Empire, and the German families. But again, the German family, the House of Hanover, moved over to Britain and infiltrated the British monarchy to become the Holy Roman Empire, or a very large piece. So it's all very, very interesting. Sorry to go off that rant, but it's very, very interesting to understand that there are bigger questions at hand. There's more complexity there than just Rome did it. There are definitely patterns. There are things I still have to go through, and maybe I will come to the point where I connect it back to Rome. But the current understanding of how Rome has always been the empire, even now, and that Britain doesn't hold really any power, or the crown doesn't hold really any power in comparison. They are just a company through these liveries in the City of London that help govern the Roman Empire. I just don't see it. I don't see it through what I've learnt in history. I don't see it whatsoever. I can see how even the Bank of England, when it was created and it was backed by possibly backed by the Pope or the Vatican, I can see how that was still under the Holy Roman Empire, and that there was no real opposition against moving the empire or decentralizing the empire towards Britain when Protestantism was created and put through by King Henry VIII, and then his daughter Elizabeth, then being married into the Rosicrucian German Frederick V, and so forth, and that whole progression. I can see that it's not as black and white as people try to prove it is. And I say that I don't know if you've seen, but a lot of the time people are saying, well, the solid proof that Rome has continued through the establishment of the Crown and Bank of England was that the Vatican backed the establishment of Bank of England, and William of Orange was the Roman bloodline and was an asset and was put through and implemented in Britain to revolutionize revolutionize Britain and the monarchy. But what it did was it opened up, that then stopped Catholic rule, and it brought in Protestantism. So then that just paved the way for the Holy Roman Empire to evolutionize and then dissolve later on. So it's very, very interesting the way my line of thinking, but also how I don't particularly believe the solid proof that there was, that I did initially believe that the Roman Empire has been moving through. I think possibly, and I don't know this for certain just yet, but I think possibly that this is another front. This is another way to brainwash and control the public into believing that their enemy is unreachable, and that there's another empire that's actually ruling rather than the empire that is in fact ruling, if that makes any sense. If you have any questions on that, and if you're wondering what the hell I'm talking about, please just comment below, because I'm definitely in my head about it. I've been in my head about it for a long time. I'm trying to figure it out. So if it doesn't make any sense, please just ask me a question, and I'm happy to answer. But this here is just so insane when you're thinking about the Privy Council. The Privy Council is meant to be completely governmental. It controls certain countries. We have a federal, in Australia, we have a federal executive council or committee. I think it's a council, instead of a Privy Council, that are then the go-between Australian government and the monarchy or Britain. And we've got a Governor General as well. But we have a federal executive council rather than a Privy Council. And usually they're just purely ministerial. So the way we govern for Britain is very different. Our colony is very different with how our constitution is set up compared to Canada, which has a Privy Council. So the Privy Council is meant to be completely governmental. They're meant to be the advisory council between the Canadian government and the King of Britain, the British monarchy, King Charles. Supposedly, you're meant to believe that our state of affairs in Australia, despite however we're set up in Australia, America, in Canada, America, you're not even meant to think that the King's involved, but you're meant to believe in Canada and Australia that the King's role is purely ceremonial. You're not meant to believe. Sorry. It's so stupid. It's just so stupid, sad. It makes me angry. It makes me emotional that we've been brainwashed so heavily to believe that we had control over our country, that we weren't colonized anymore, that the King was just a ceremonial figure, and yet he has this connection between our government and a Governor General. Like, it's insane. It is so stupid, and I feel so silly that I ever believed that. I'm just like, how the fuck did I believe it all my life? How have we believed it all of our lives? How does that make any sense? The Privy Council is completely governmental, okay? Let me explain. I think I've got it here. Okay, here it is. So the Privy Council is a constitutional political institution, and appointments are made for cabinet ministers, former prime ministers, chief justices, and key political advisors. It is purely constitutional and governmental, okay? It is meant to be separate from the King and from the British monarchy and the British monarch. You're not meant to have any members of the Privy Council as the monarchy. You're not meant to have that infiltration. You're not meant to have that involvement, because that is, well, pretty much treason under the agreement between British Parliament and the British monarchy, supposedly, because you're meant to believe that the monarchy and the empire doesn't exist in a more than ceremonial and a purely political role governing our world and governing our countries. And this is what this is revealing. So it's meant to stop the monarchy and the monarch from being political. It is obviously a PR facade, because you can see that now. It's obvious now when you see this sort of decision about Camilla being appointed. She's not just Queen Consort. She's not a queen. And they're calling her Queen Camilla. And they're appointing her as a political member of the Privy Council. So now the Queen is going to be advising Charles. I wouldn't even call her the Queen. She's not even a queen. It's just so fucking ridiculous, and I cannot believe these people are ruling our countries. Camilla, who has never earned much respect whatsoever across the colonies and dominions in the Commonwealth, she is now a political member of the Privy Council, equal to cabinet ministers, former prime ministers, chief justices, and key political advisors. Okay? They're going to tell you that that's a purely ceremonial role. That is absolute bullshit. This is treason, because the agreement between British Parliament and the British monarchy is that they never become political. That's why you have the Privy Council. They are meant to be the political go-between. And the king is only meant to receive news of how the countries are governed democratically, independently, free-willingly, all that bullshit. So they're meant to be the ones saying, hey, this happened, just so you should know. And Charles is like, yep, cool. I'm ceremonial. I'm strictly ceremonial. I can't do shit about it. But it's nice to see you. Have a great day. And just tell me what's happening next. That's what you're meant to believe, right? Now you've got Camilla acting as a political advisor and intermediary between Canada and Charles. It is treasonous. It just stops. It tells you how it's always been, that there's nothing ever been ceremonial. The Queen lied to us. The Queen has been the most betraying of all, and people don't see that, and people still believe that she was better than Charles or better than this. She was the one who betrayed you. She was the one who created this fake Commonwealth empire, making you believe that we were independent. Why would Britain give away their colonies and dominions? They didn't. They never did. It was just constitutionally that you believed you were independent. And it hasn't stopped wars. It hasn't stopped complete chaos and collapse. And we're living in the prime example of that. They have us by the balls. And this is just phenomenal that this is happening. It's absolutely phenomenal, but it tells you everything at the same time. And it tells us that Charles controls the Privy Council. So thus also controls, and we already know this, but he controls the British Parliament. And so the agreement, this whole belief of this constitutional ceremonial monarchy versus a British Parliament and the need for British Parliament is all bullshit. The structure is an empire, and there's supranational governance, and there's then colonial governance under supranational governance, but up the top is the monarchy and the monarch and the empire. And that is how things are run. And Canada has just given us, and these idiots, the royal family, have just given us this undeniable proof that this is what's happening. And what I've said all along is completely true. Thank you.